Okay.
Okay, welcome back everybody. This is Night Flight. I'm Judith Kova. And today I have Mary Rodwell with me. She is a leading authority in the field of UFOs, extraterrestrial contact. Her website is maryrodwell.com.au. I'm very happy to have her here and that she is willing to do this very early bird with me. And so, Mary, welcome.
Thank you, Judith. It's a pleasure.
So, you have had a very interesting life. You've been a nurse, a midwife. So how did that happen? That once all of a sudden you are in the field of UFOs and extraterrestrial contact?
Well, Judith, that's a good question. And I would have said that 40 years ago, when I was a nurse and a midwife, if you'd said to me, in your future, Mary, you're going to be traveling the world talking about UFOs and aliens, I'd have probably sent them to the nearest psychiatrist and said, that's too crazy. So it is an interesting one. But from my medical side and my profession, I went into counseling. And that was a big shift into looking at psychological, emotional health, because that made a lot more sense to me, looking at healing and preventative medicine, rather than dealing with the outcome of that, which we know, stress, 90% of illness is stress. So going into that brought me into looking also at people's experiences. And when I came to Australia, I did 2 years with grief and bereavement hospice, with people dying. And the interesting thing is too, that those that had profound grief often saw maybe images of the person that had died. They might see their grandmother, or they might see their mother, or they would feel they're communicating with them. So all of that was taken into the realm of consciousness. And I'd always believed anyway that that it always felt right that we didn't die, that we went on to other things. And I started to explore reincarnation, all those kinds of things during this time, because I was looking for answers. I was looking at ways of supporting my clients. And then the bottom line was that as I'm exploring all of this, I'm reading a lot of books right across the board. And I read 2 books. One was by Whitley Strieber, Communion, which was his own experiences with ETs, and also, which to me was a wonderful book by Dr. John Mack, the professor of psychiatry at Harvard University, who wrote Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens. And he came to the conclusion this was absolutely real. And synchronously, within a few weeks of reading them, a gentleman walks through the door and says, Mary, I've heard you're open-minded. For this, there's no support groups. For this, they just think you're a loony, you're crazy, and said, can you help? Because he'd wake up with marks on his body. His partner was having experiences. The children were having experiences. People wouldn't come to the house because they said there was demons. And he said, can you help me? And for me, it was then the start of this journey into what is this? What is going on? How real is it? And this, you can't go back once you start looking into this. And 2 weeks after him, another lady walks through the door. She's saying the same thing. So I suddenly realized this isn't unusual. And it's not just one person here in a family. Often it's the whole family, because there's intergenerational links to this. So the children, as well as the adults and grandparents, often you can trace the experience. So for me, this has opened this whole rabbit hole of what is reality, what is consciousness, who are we, where are we going, what does this all mean, all the big questions then were facing me in supporting those that were coming to me. And as you now know, Judith, over 3,500 families and children later globally has become my work, and this is what I do now, 24/7.
Yeah. So you provided a safe space for those people who had these experiences, and let's say the flow of customers never stopped.
Well, what amazed me was to find out how many people this involved. And when I first started, I thought it was very rare. And I connected to a lady who was a social worker that had had experiences. And we put an advertisement in the local paper, and it was abduction support group, the very first in Perth, Western Australia. 12 people turned up in the very first one that we ever did. So this was 12 already, you know. It was like, so how many more are out there that need this support or don't know where to go, was what came to me. And as I'd been trained as a counsellor by this time, I thought, well, someone's got to provide support and professional support. That was really important to me because they didn't know where to go. And a lot of UFO organizations were very good at sightings and all the things about Rodwell and what have you. But the support for those having experiences was very, very limited, because a lot of those within that organization were not trained as counselors. They were not trained as support. They may be trained, they may have done research, but they weren't there for emotional support. So a lot of them didn't want to know about, oh, you've had experience on call, we can't deal with that. We just can do, yeah, tell me about your sighting, which was, you know, only the beginning of the journey. The sighting is just the start of people realizing that there's somebody in that spacecraft. There's somebody that's interacting with me on that spacecraft. What does that mean? Why me? You know, why do they want to take me? What does this mean? What does it mean for my family? All these questions were what my job was, to help them work that out, to help them connect the dots.
Mm. So why is this up to this day so ridiculed? And well, I guess depending on whom you go to, you might end up in a psych ward and be medicated into oblivion. So what's going on here? Is there an agenda to sweep it back under the rug, or what are we looking at?
Judith, you're absolutely right. It's all of that.
Mm.
The first thing is that I came to understand was, while all these people ridiculed, when it was plainly obvious it was affecting their lives in all sorts of ways. And it was not just one person in the family. Often it would be brothers and sisters, and it would be parents. So we're not talking about a hallucination or a fantasy here. We're talking about, you know, real things happening to them, being missing and having missing time. And then when you look into why this truth embargo is going on, the whole point of it is that those behind the scenes have made up an agenda, which is to deny this is going on for lots of different reasons. And I'll make it very, very clear that one of them was initially because they didn't think people were ready to hear it. But secondly, because when they discovered a lot of the technology and more about the beings, they decided that it was far better to keep that quiet, because they wanted to use this technology, which also would make our technology redundant. And they wanted to have a process where they would make as much money out of it as possible. It also would have changed everything, because if you've got free energy, then you're not going to use the what we have now, where you pay for everything. So there are lots and lots of agendas why. So the reason they decided to ridicule it is that way it was suppressing the information. And the whole idea for that was because of all these other agendas on the planet. The problem, of course, for people having experiences is that then modern psychology completely denies this as a reality. So you go to a clinical psychologist, or you go to a psychiatrist, and you're going to be medicated. You could very well end up in hospital. And I have met hundreds of people that have had that experience, and it has been really detrimental to them. And one of the cases I wrote in Awakening was a young lady of 19 who rang me up and told me, I think I'm having experiences. When I went to see the doctor, she said, when I was 14, saying I was seeing aliens, he said, there's no such thing, you're schizophrenic, and gave her a cocktail of medications. She tried to take her life several times. And it was a talk show in America that she was watching on television that was people talking about their experiences. And she realized then that this could be real. And then she got in touch with me. But the problem then is, our whole system has been taking these medications for, nearly 5 or 6 years. And this isn't something you can just suddenly come off. But at the same time, this awful conflict between, am I really crazy or am I not crazy? So what is this? And I supported her for many, many years. A very brave young lady, but she's the tip of the iceberg, Judith. Wow. This is the problem. It's everywhere, in every country, and there are enormous numbers, but people don't understand what it is they're experiencing. So many of them just keep quiet. They live in two worlds, the one that's the 3D reality and the multidimensional one, where they're seeing maybe orbs of light, they may see spirits, they may see beings, they're seeing craft, they feel different, they struggle with all of that, thinking they maybe are crazy, all because of this cover-up that has been going on for almost 100 years.
How would you distinguish? I mean, we also have this phenomena of MyLabs, where the military is doing abductions. So how would you, if somebody comes to you, how would you distinguish between a real encounter and a military thing?
That's a very good question. And it's been a process of learning how it happens. Those that have been taken by ETs and those that are taken by the military and drugged and interrogated, the whole idea of that by the military is they want to find out what happens on the spacecraft. They want to find out what the ETs are doing, their agendas, etc. And the best way to do that is abduct people who've had experience with these ETs. When I've done any kind of workshop with experiencers, which we call those that are having contact, what I discovered was the most traumatized were always the MyLab, were always the military ones, because it was a completely different agenda. And the agenda, as I say, was interrogation. It could be trauma, rape, the whole, and also to terrify them enough that they never talk about it. Because who's going to believe your own military are doing this to your own citizens? No one's going to ever believe that in a million years. So they were always far more traumatized, even to those that had the ET ones that may be very fearful for a while. They would work through that process and see and understand maybe there's often healing procedures done on spacecraft, for example, which they may have misunderstood. We found with our surveys with the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation, where we did this survey of 4,200 people with 600 questions. One of the fascinating things was that over 50% had healing procedures on board craft, which of course nobody, in the mainstream realizes. There's a whole different agenda with most of these, what we call the benevolent ETs, that are there that are trying to raise consciousness. Whereas the ones in the MyLab, that's to traumatize the person sufficiently that they never talk about it and will remain traumatized. So there's a very big difference between MyLab trauma and the trauma of not understanding what's going on spacecraft and what is happening. And when you work with hypnosis, you'll see why that is, because often with somebody, they may be scared because they don't know what happened. They may be scared of what are they doing to them. But when you take them into trance and they explore the experience and they see themselves having a procedure done, you can get them to ask, well, what is this? And they'll often find out there's a medical exam, but there may be a healing procedure done, or there may be some other procedure done. And they get the understanding of what's going on. But MyLab, they just see themselves being traumatized by humans for this information. And I wrote the foreword for a book called Facing the Shadow, Embracing the Light by Nayara Isley, who was MyLab. And she explained in that the difference between her star family, who would take her up onto spacecraft, and the MyLab side of her experiences. And part of the reason she said that this happened was that this was what she called a soul agreement, that she would experience the MyLab and then write about it and expose it. And that's what she did in that particular book, because it is completely different. And also that there is something called program life forms, which are clones of the grey ETs and reptilians particularly. And they will use these clones as part of trying to get them to believe this is all extraterrestrial. And in fact, these are terrestrial clones of these beings. They're not the genuine ETs at all, but they will see them and believe them to be so. So there's a really dark agenda with MyLab. And I wouldn't like to think about how many people who I've spoken to will have the ET side and they'll have the MyLab, and it's completely different in terms of their emotional reaction to it.
Mm-hmm. We have a lot of people waiting for or hoping for total disclosure. As far as I'm concerned, the cat is out of the bag. So I'm not really waiting for it. I don't need government, authorities tell me, yeah, it's real. But what is your feeling? Will that happen, that some official authority is going to say, yeah, well, guys, yes, they are here. They have been here for a real long time. And this is how it is. Will that happen anytime soon?
Well, in a way, Judith, they've already done it, in the sense that the CIA has released that footage from the HMS Nimitz. Because I actually met one of the pilots of that who'd taken the footage of these Tic Tac craft that they'd seen. He, in fact, Kevin, lovely gentleman, told me that since then he's had lots of strange experiences, including his mind and his body has been enhanced after these experiences in a very positive way. He is waiting for the chance to go to Congress and say this, this is my experience, this is real. The bottom line is that they're doing it at a pace that will suit them. But underneath all of that, I believe disclosure is going to happen from the ground up. In other words, more and more people now are coming out, writing books about their experiences. Credible people that, we see in mainstream as credible, highly professional people that know what we would see as having some authority. I mean, my clients have been everything from lawyers, doctors, nurses, right through to celebrities, right across the board. I've had clients of every echelon of society, including religious ministers, that have come out and admitted that their religion has not fitted with the experiences that they've had. And in my book, The New Human, there are at least two ministers of religion, and Minister Carter and Minister Jeff Schultz. And Jeff is an Australian minister of 40 years in a Christian ministry. And he came to me before he even told the rest of his own hierarchy, his bishop, that he had experienced reincarnation and he experienced ET contact. And he said, and he was in this conflict between what he was preaching to what he was experiencing. So I say to people, this isn't about a belief in the sense that you either believe in aliens or you don't. This is experience that tells you this is real. And this is the point, because people say, oh, well, you're a believer. The only reason I've become a believer is I've seen these craft. I've talked to hundreds of thousands of people who've had experiences. And I remember saying once on a breakfast television show when she said, oh, you believe them, Mary? And I said, well, it's like this. I've never been to Alaska, but lots of people have been to Alaska. I may never go to Alaska, but because so many people have been there and taken pictures of it, I've got to believe Alaska exists. And this is exactly the same as I've got no memory of being on a spacecraft. I've seen anomalous lights many, many times. I've seen hundreds of hours of footage of incredible images of craft. Every 6 minutes around the globe, someone's taking pictures of UFOs. And that's probably the tip of the iceberg. To me, this is a no-brainer. they're here, and they've been here all through history. They've not been understood as we understand them now. And I say, you know, these were the gods that came down with technology. And the bottom line is they were interpreted as gods simply because of their technology, etc., etc. I mean, to me, it's, you know, there is no question of its reality.
Yeah. And what I found interesting a couple of years ago, when the Vatican came out and said, we are willing to baptize them if they wish so.
Oh, look, it's all there. You know, I say to people, just look into it for your own understanding. Don't believe me. Don't believe anyone. Just go and look. There is so much out there now that is qualifying this reality. The bottom line is when does that shift in mainstream psyche get to a point where everyone says, well, of course they've been here. Of course they are. And that will happen, I think, soon, because more and more people are seeing the craft. There is what I call a kind of an awakening with a lot of people. And that's been happening over the last few years, where people have started to have their own spiritual experience, which has catapulted them into looking at all of this and realizing they're part of it. And that's been happening exponentially.
What do you make of the idea that so-called benevolent aliens cannot interfere here because our low vibration, our frequency does not fit with theirs? It would literally crush them.
Well, I do understand that we're looking at not just physical extraterrestrials, but interdimensional, extradimensional, transdimensional, visitors from our future. So we've got different frequencies, but what I have come to understand, if we're looking at it from a spiritual perspective, is many of those intelligences that can't interfere directly have brought in souls from their origin into human form to work from the human angle. And many of those that call themselves starseeds believe that their origin comes from these benevolent ETs. So that's the way that it's working. It's working directly through the human form in human consciousness.
Okay. We also have this, you could say there are two groups. Some people say, oh, they are all lovely, all wonderful, and nothing can go wrong. And then you have another group that says, no, actually they are pretty malevolent, and I would suggest stay away from them. So I'm somewhat in between. I think it's not just black or white, but where is that coming from? The idea that everything is hunky-dory, and the other one is maybe a little bit fear-based. But what is your feeling? Where's that coming from? Is it wishful thinking versus fear, or?
It's a good question, and for me, much as I would like it to be black and white, I'd love that to be the case. I don't think it is.
No.
I do believe there are, what we noticed in the survey, which was fascinating, was 85% of that 4,000 individuals said they had psycho-spiritual transformation. So it was positive for them out of the 4,200. So only 15% were still in the fear and said they were all evil or whatever. I believe that there are many benevolent ones, because we wouldn't have an outcome like that otherwise, because, you know, it wouldn't fit with a dark agenda. You know, transformation doesn't go with a dark agenda. But there may be those certainly that are self-serving, is my term for the ones that have their own agendas. So you've got possibly those. The difficulty is that with things like the reptilians, they've got a negative connotation. Everybody thinks the reptilians are bad. but I know some people that have had very positive experiences with some of them. And they say that, like humans, there's good, the bad, the indifferent, that there's some of them are wanting to raise their own consciousness. Others still are staying in the negative agenda. And I don't see a problem with expecting all species to have, you know, the difference between those that are more highly conscious and spiritually aware against those that are still evolving into that or whatever, just like humans. So I suspect that every species will have a little mix of that in terms of the journey. On the whole, if you've got some within the reptilians, for example, that are positive, as it appears to be, you can't say, well, they're all bad. You can only say, my experience is this. So when I'm working with someone and they're having experiences, I usually say to them, what is your experience with this being? Because generally we know when someone's sending is in a loving space or whether they're not. We soon get to know that. And I say to them, you make the decision about what you feel about this being by your own experience of it or your communication with it. So for me, it's not about black and white. It's many, many shades of grey. And having said that, I talked to one woman about the greys. And she said, well, Mary, in my understanding, there are 165 species of grey. So in other words, you can't just take one grey and say they're all either good or they're all bad, because you've got all these species. And it's like taking one human and saying, well, all humans are like this human. So it's all about resonance. It's all about your interaction and how you choose to understand what that being means to you. And that's all that I feel has the most integrity.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever watched this TV series SG1?
I love it.
SG1? Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites.
Yeah. What I found interesting in that TV series, that one of the benevolent races, the Asgards, were portrayed as greys.
I know. There's a lot more in that series in terms of the extraterrestrial component, the the whole thing with the Stargate, because apparently there are gates like that on this planet. Whether they look exactly like that, I don't know. But I do think that often the fiction is being shown to us as fiction, when in fact there's a reality behind it. And I think that's with a lot of the science fiction. When I see science fiction now, I'm very keen to see, is that telling me something about what's really going on this planet? Because often there is behind it an agenda. So I look at all sci-fi like that now and say, okay, so they're showing us this. This is telling me that there's something very relevant to that information in that sci-fi.
Yeah. So in your experience, I mean, you talk to thousands of people. Have you, what was the one thing that surprised you the most?
Oh gosh, I'm constantly being surprised.
Okay.
Let's put it like this. Once I started down this rabbit hole of realizing this was real, that we are being visited through millennia by so many different civilizations across universes and dimensions and whatever. That in itself is something. But what I think has been the most interesting is when you take somebody into hypnosis and you allow them to explore their multidimensional experiences, to see that everything we can possibly imagine and beyond what we can imagine, it will often come through, such as parallel realities, for example, different timelines, the fact that we've all been, many of these intelligences in different planets, different realities, that we've had many, many lifetimes with, our soul groups and what have. All of this has expanded my understanding of my earth life. And for me, I think the thing that's been has been so powerful is the comfort that has given me in the fact that when this life finishes, I'm just going off to another adventure in some other form or whatever. That is wonderful to think that, it makes a lot of sense. So I suppose what this has done, more than any religion, has proved to me that we live on, and more than anything else has given me a sense of who I am, what I am, and the excitement of knowing that we continually grow and evolve in different forms for eternity, to me makes the whole thing, gives me a sense of comfort, but also gives me a sense of purpose as well, and makes sense. In other words, knowing we're multidimensional, I think, has been having that real sense of being multidimensional, if anything, has given me a whole new sense of the big picture. So what surprised me, I'm constantly being surprised, constantly being shown more of our multidimensional reality, constantly being shown how you get a little 10-year-old telling you that he comes from a planet where he was blue, and that he remembers being a spirit and the coming into his mummy's tummy when he chooses which lifetime he's going to have on Earth and comes into mummy's tummy. Whereas another 10-year-old tells you this is his first Earth life, but he's come in to help the planet with the pollution. I think the children, particularly, with the clarity of their awareness still there, of their past lives, their mission, their purpose, has given me also a great sense of we have a future on this planet, that they've come in to give us a future. And when we talk about all the dark stuff, all the agendas that are going on to try and keep us in this box and to control us in the way that they want to, you've got all these wonderful new humans coming in that are having the mission to change that, to free us from that kind of containment and slavery, if you like. That is, for me, one of the most important and heartening things, particularly as I'm a grandma and I've got 6 grandchildren and I want them to have a future, not to be slaves to some overall thing, but to know that they are bringing their awareness in to change this planet. So there's lots of things that have come through my work that help me keep going and have hope for the future.
Mm. Some say we are on a human farm anyhow, and the archons are recycling us non-stop.
Yeah.
So would you agree with that?
No, I wouldn't. And the reason I'm saying that is when I take people into regressions, they explore not only this life and what's happened here, but also other lifetimes. And when I've taken somebody into a past life on this planet or another one, they will explore seeing their dead physical body, and they will come out of that and they will say they're in another realm where they've got a guide, and they may even explore their soul grouping. There is nothing about being forced into anything at all. They are choosing their next life. They're choosing what they want to do. They will connect with their soul family. And anyone who wants to see more of that, there are a number of those that facilitate life between lives. One of them is Dr. Michael Newton, Journey of Souls and Destiny of Souls, where he has regressed hundreds of people into that between life state. And not one of them has come up with being contained or being recycled in the way that this matrix is supposedly. I mean, I've heard this a number of times. I think that what may be going on, and this is taking it from a hypothesis that I have, is as a soul, we will create certain scenarios for us to experience. And, you know, almost like on Star Trek, you've got the holodeck. And you say, right, in this lifetime, I'm going to have this experience. I'm going to be in the 1930s and I'm going to have this, and this. And maybe as a co-creator with the consciousness, we create the scenario that allows us to grow as a soul, saying, right, I'm going to have this experience, I'm going to challenge myself with this and this and this, and I'm going to create this very dark thing because I want to experience it. Maybe for some people, that's what that is, that they've chosen to have that kind of understanding to transcend it and transcend their fear. Perhaps for some, that's what will be created. But I think we all have our own particular perception of our reality in this life that we as a soul have created, and that will be what it is. Doris Stokes was a medium in England, and she said that your belief system on this planet, when you go to the next realm, will be what you perceive for a time until you realize it's more than that. So in other words, if you believe in Jesus and Mary, you'll get Jesus and Mary and you'll get the whole heaven bit. And if you believe in another thing, that's what you'll see to start with until you realize that it's a lot greater than that. And that makes a lot of sense to me. And that's why I don't agree with that hypothesis, that other hypothesis.
It makes a lot. Okay, I can see that we choose our, let's say, a plan for our soul. And you know where the problem comes in for me with that idea, it seems to fail, and simply because a whole bunch of people here in this construct, they stay in the base program. And what I mean by that is, you grow up, you go to school, you get brainwashed in the institutions, then you find a job, you get a family, if you are lucky, you are able to, to go on holiday once or twice a year. And then that's it. And because you are exhausted at the end of the day, after your job is done, you doze out in front of the TV with a TV dinner or a box of chocolates or potato chips or whatever. And that cycle repeats itself for decades. And I have a problem with accepting that that is a soul plan. You know
Right.
where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I do. And I've often wondered what people achieve by what appears to be leading a very mundane life in that sense. But through that mundane life, there will be growth. It won't be as exponential as some. It's almost like the soul sometimes chooses a far more relaxed journey, some life. If they've had a huge traumatic, challenging life, they may choose to have a less challenging one next time round for just looking at more subtle things like relationships or whatever. I mean, in a way, let me give you an example of that. When I left England to come to Australia, migrating with my family, I talked to a lady who'd lived in that little town all her life. And I said, I'm going to Australia and it's all going to be so exciting and different and wonderful. And she said, oh, I would never do that. I've lived here all my life and I can't imagine living anywhere else. And it was like we were looking at the world in a completely different way. I couldn't wait to leave that little town and go and have an adventure somewhere else. But for her, that would have been a nightmare. So there are things, even in the more pedestrian kind of life, that perhaps we're exploring as a soul that we don't do in every life. And we don't know what the growth is, what the learning is, but it may be a lot more subtle than someone that's doing having lots of challenges and whatever. And I think some lifetimes we do pick quieter adventures on this planet or other planets than we do in others. Because all of it is growth, all of it is change, learning to be human, as the starseeds say. I've come to this planet to learn how to be human. And it's very difficult down here because it's so different from where I'm from. When a 10-year-old told me he's visited by light beings and where he comes from is a planet of light. And he said, Mary, on this planet of light, you instantly manifest. He said, down here on Earth, it's like a game. he said, it's much harder to manifest down here. He was complaining about how harder it was in this density or whatever. So that's the thing. The soul is choosing different environments for different growth. So even the pedestrian ones that appear to some of us to be very boring.
Mm. So when people contact you because they need your support, your help, and you're providing that space for them to open up and to talk, and did you find that as soon as they had the impression that somebody was taking them seriously and listened to them, that was a huge chunk of their healing from their trauma? Yeah.
Absolutely, Judith. I say not everyone do I do hypnosis or whatever. Sometimes they just need someone who isn't going to mock them. That's not going to, that's going to listen, no matter how bizarre. They will say, they'll say to me, I hope you don't think I'm crazy. They're afraid of telling me something. And I say, look, you can say anything. You can talk about parallel universes if you like. I said, none of it is a problem to me. But it's just the mere fact that they've had someone finally who isn't making fun of them, that will hear them. And that to them is sometimes all they need. They just need someone to believe their reality and because even maybe their siblings or their family or their relatives, you know, they find there's no one that wants to hear it. They may not laugh at them, but they will just shut down. And that becomes really hard when you've got this whole other reality and you've got no one who wants to hear it or who wants to support you with it. So my job can be just that, just as a listening ear. And then I may be able to say, well, I have others that have had that experience or others that have this. And that gives them a validation that, you know, that it's got integrity. And that's why I send out the questionnaire, because they're patterns of experience. And I'm saying, you don't even have to send it back. This is helping you see what's connected to your experience. And sometimes that's all they need. They don't need anything else.
Mm. Have you ever come across somebody who had contact and didn't know?
Yes, absolutely. And this was somebody doing some artwork for me via someone else. And they were just saying, oh, what is it you want in this artwork and all the rest of it. They were a really amazing artist. And we started talking. And 6 hours later, after we'd been talking, that person realized that this was their experience too. And they were in total shock. But what was so fascinating, and there's another bit to this story, is that they were in New Zealand and I was obviously in Australia. So they were worried about the bill, the phone bill, because this was when we were still paying a lot of money, you know, to do international calls. And they rung up the telephone company and said, what is the bill? Because I had this long conversation. And they said, we have no record of that call. Okay. Now you explain that one.
Yeah, I can't. So when we go into the field of so-called junk DNA, do you think that has something to do with this entire subject? That I don't believe in junk DNA. I don't think for 1 second that is useless or whatever. So what would you say?
It's a good one. Yes. Supposedly we have only 5% of our DNA that we use and 95% of it's junk. Well, you know, the whole point is that I don't think nature produces junk anything for a start. And that was interesting to me, but particularly was interesting when I had molecular biologists questioning the nature of our DNA. And it was that highlighted to me there was something important in that DNA that was not being acknowledged by mainstream. And what they have talked about, and I've known several scientists tell me, the evidence that we've been manipulated and altered in our DNA, where there's been splicing going on in our DNA in itself was, and Dr. Francis Crick, co-founder of the DNA Molecule, particularly in his book Life Itself, said that he believed we were of intelligent design. And the evidence that we have, where we went from Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon, and then there's the missing link, then suddenly out of the blue becomes Homo sapiens sapiens with twice the brain size. That in itself says, how on earth did that happen? With 223 genes added to our genetic makeup at that time that were all to do with higher psychological functioning. That doesn't happen in nature. So there you have the package that is very evident. And then you have all the indigenous peoples tell us how the star people told them about interbreeding with us, genetically manipulating us, from the Dogon tribe in West Africa to Australia, where they talked about the Wandjina. They all mention this this connection of these species coming and adding their own DNA to human DNA. And we hear of Sitchin talking about the Anunnaki, etc., etc. So we are hybrids. And when people say, oh, well, people are talking about these hybrids, they're going to come and take over the world. I said, well, we already have taken over the world because we're the hybrids. So what's the problem? We've already done that, So yes, there are upgrades. There are certainly upgrades of human now. And that's the next step, I think, of the new generations of human that are activating more of that, this so-called dormant DNA to produce these expanded abilities that belong to our star ancestors.
Mm. We have a lot of TV series that show us so-called supernatural abilities, humans with supernatural abilities. And the word supernatural, it's still natural. Yeah, it's okay, it's heightened, absolutely, but it's still natural. Do you think in general we are moving towards that? Is that what they are showing us? So
absolutely.
Once these people kick up, it's, oh yeah, it's like in that TV series.
I think they are, because many of those, even older generations of what we call star seeds, have shown more and more abilities to bilocate, for example, telepathic abilities. And a lot of the children talk about this. They'll talk about, being able to sense from people certain information or what have you, have healing abilities, seeing energy fields, seeing the beings, seeing far more multidimensionally. Their hearing is enhanced, their senses are enhanced, like the sense of touch, sense of taste, all these are enhanced, plus this multidimensional ability to perceive more of the different realms. And this is where I believe, as our DNA gets activated, our dormant DNA gets activated, we will be also able to do this as well. So the fiction isn't fiction. I think this is just showing us where we're going as a species. And this is what the beings have been telling those that communicate with them, that we are being activated to become more aware, more spiritually aware, more conscious of who we are, so that we can actually literally make a difference on this planet in this whole new way. I was talking to a 7-year-old in the US, and he told me two things that were interesting. And he said, I can tell when people are lying and when they tell the truth. And I said, how does that feel? And he said, well, when they're lying, he says, I go all cold, but when they tell the truth, I feel warm. He says, and I can speak dolphin, he said to me. And I said, can you? He said, do you want to hear it? And I said, yes. So he does all the clicks. So now you don't normally get a child of 7 telling you this kind of thing, but this is how they're experiencing more of that enhanced awareness. It's just the start of many of the different things I've been told from these children.
So What do you make of the idea that there are different races, and within those races, different factions, and those factions work with different governments here on Earth, and among them, there is feud as well? Do you think that's possible?
I'm not sure I understand the
Yeah,
question,
that
really.
let's say United States, they work with a different race than Australia. Australia has another faction than Germany, and so on. And so basically, we are having different jurisdictions here. Do you think that's possible?
Well, I don't know for sure, but all I do know is that right across the globe, people are seeing mantid beings. They're seeing lion beings. They're seeing different humanoid beings, light beings, energy beings, crystalline beings. Whether some species of these visitors focuses on different cultures, I'm not really sure. Certainly, it seems, given the differences in our genetic makeup, from the Asian, for example, to the black to the white, maybe there's a preponderance of a particular star visitor genetics that create those particular profiles, if you like, although that's now being mixed or whatever. Ultimately, though, there seems to be a confederation, is one word, that of different intelligences that are working with planet Earth. Although there are many, I've talked to some experiencers having encounters with many, many different types of humanoid as well, from other places and whatever. So I've just mentioned a few, but I believe there's many hundreds of different intelligences having some impact on our species. But certainly it's interesting, the different cultures have, it looks like there might be one particular species that is involved in that. But to me, mostly, it's been global. It's not been mantid here, light beings here, lion beings somewhere else and whatever. But what is different is the acceptance of this in the cultures. For example, in South America, very open to ovnis, very open to contactees and whatever. Their psyche or their belief system is a lot more accepting. Whereas, as we talked about, in Europe, for example, in Scandinavia, it's very tight. And I think that's the Western mind that has shut out a great deal of the, through the programming, the acceptance of the multidimensional reality.
Mm. Such a cooperation with certain races that are in some fashion involved here, how might that look like?
Well, some talk about federations, galactic communities, and those that talk about going out of body to inform these different groups of extraterrestrials what's going on the planet. They will explain what their experience is, what the psyche's like, how they understand it. And I was talking to one lady many years ago who explained it very well. She called herself a walk-in, which meant that her soul moved into a physical body at a certain age rather than as a tiny fetus. And she explained that she was on a cylindrical craft. She was 9 feet tall, blonde hair, blue eyes. They were telepathic, and they absorbed food. Light was their food. The next thing she remembers is being in a 3-year-old girl's body where she had to learn to speak and she had to learn to eat because that was not natural to her. She explained to me that she was a bit like an undercover agent, she said, because what she was doing, she would go and get debriefed to her family, her star family, regularly about what it was like to be human, her experiences as a human, what was going on the planet as a human. So she was literally informing them of the whole range of what was going on. And she said there were others like her, but I've had others that don't say they're a walk-in, but just say as a soul they've come from one of these species and their job is to help with seeing what happens on the planet, but also being part of the mission. the mission is to help in some way, help this planet. So that there are lots of agendas with those that are aware of their star heritage.
Okay, so now we have an especially crazy situation. And it gets more and more absurd by the day. So these races that know about it, are they not a little bit ashamed of themselves? You know,
Well,
as a bystander looking at this shithole and...
I love your turn of phrase. Well, the whole point of bringing these enlightened souls to this planet is to change the whole, because they're seeing that what's happened over the generations and in terms of the control of this planet has slowly been taken over by what we would say self-serving agendas. And these are obviously humans that have decided to be part of that dark agenda of control and slavery, really, of the human race, that which is ruled by greed, power, you know, all those kinds of things. And the whole point is, the reason of us incarnating on this planet is we make choices. We live in a duality. The whole point of a duality is to have the dark and the light, and the, you know, what is loving, what is not loving. The way we learn that is through this experience on this planet. You can't know joy unless you know sadness. You can't, you know, we need that duality to experience. Then there's the choice. Well, do I gravitate to the light, or do I gravitate to the dark? So this is the adventure for the soul on this planet. Are they going to be more attracted to the dark or more attracted to the light? That's part of the soul growth, and what have you. And we've got a preponderance, it seems to me, of those going into the dark and wanting to control the rest of humanity. That is the challenge for those that are coming in now, to see if they can avoid that and be part of the balance, which is what we're looking for now, which is to change that scenario into one of a new earth, a new beginning, and what have you. And many of the children coming in talk about that they've come in to be part of that, to help with raising the frequency of this planet. One of the experiences I have great respect for is a molecular biologist, Dr. Lena Olson. And she said to me, she's an experiencer, and she said she was told that we're separating out into two frequencies, low frequency people and high frequency people. And we're making that choice now. Are we going to stay with the 3D experience that is going on now, or we're choosing to raise our frequency so we're no longer part of that? And I believe we're a bit at a crossroads. And to quote a 10-year-old who I asked about this, the 10-year-old said to me, "Mary, this is the reset of the planet. This is the reset." And I thought, well, that makes a lot of sense. So we are now being challenged as a species to say, are we going to allow that now through fear? Are we going to buy into that? Or are we actually going to now transcend that to go to another level of awareness? And this is the challenge of humanity right now.
Yeah, but the majority will go along with it.
Well, we don't quite know, because there's been a lot of people waking up recently.
Not
and over the last...
Not enough.
Don't know. I probably have a little bit more of a positive spin on it, simply because I'll tell you for why. And this is a very personal thing. If they'd said to me before I came here, right, Mary, you're going to go to planet Earth, it's in a pretty bad way, you're going to work your butt off, but I'm really sorry, but at the end of it, it's going to be a waste of time. Do you know what I would be saying to them? Find someone else to do that, because I'm not doing it. I'm only coming if it's going to make a difference. And I believe very strongly that these children that are so aware as souls know what they're dealing with by coming here, and they wouldn't bother to come if it was going to be a waste of time. I don't think they would bother to come any more than I would. So that's my theory. So I'm hanging on to that for dear life at the moment. But that is my feeling, is that one of the 12-year-olds I spoke to some years ago said to Mary, this planet has been in this place where it's lost it 3 times, he said, but we're 95% now at the point where we might actually make it. So I'm hanging on to that for dear life and hoping that he's right. So for me, I think we'll do it. I really think we'll do it. But I know it doesn't necessarily. They always say it's the darkest before the dawn. And I'm hoping that this is the case this time round on planet Earth. So we'll see.
Yeah, we will see. Exactly. What I see happening is that a lot of people, actually really the majority, they go along with the entire agenda. They swallow the COVID story hook, line, and sinker. And now we have to abolish classical music and take a knee and Black Lives Matter and what. There is no. I really don't see a light there. Well, yes, I know there are people, and there are more and more people waking. Yes. But it's still very minute. Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of people are very careful now not to look as though they are not part of the program. I think they're being careful because they get vilified, they get attacked and what have you. But it doesn't mean that their thinking isn't in a new line. They're just being careful not to look as though they're different, because it's amazing. You come out with this stuff to various of the community, they'll think you're terrible. They'll think that you don't care or whatever. So I think a lot of people may look as though they're following, but I think underneath it, there is a whole new feeling about it. And it's only because they get attacked. Look at the people that get attacked now if you say anything different to the narrative. So I think there's a lot of people that just don't say what they really think.
Yeah, but don't we need people to speak up?
Well, you and I are doing it, because we don't care. Because it's nonsense, and I will say it's nonsense. This whole thing that we're being told, from masks to all the rest of it, and this so-called pandemic that is coming up, and what we're doing. I mean, I can see the absurdity of it, and I think that they have pushed people to a point where there's only so far you can push people before they decide enough already. And sometimes we're human enough that we have to have our back against the wall before we actually do something. And I feel that we're getting very close to our back against the wall. So I still think we're going to do it. I really do. Because I know I wouldn't have incarnated if it was a waste of time. I would have refused. I said, so.
Or are we looking at a scenario what Christians would call the separation of the wheat and the chaff?
And it may be that. Some have talked about, like Lena, about the separation from those of the low frequency to the high frequency, and have talked about a new earth. And a lot of the children, as well as adults, have been shown this new frequency of a new earth, of a higher frequency, that those that are ready will actually move to that. And the others that wish to in this lifetime stay with a 3D reality as well. And that may be the way it happens. And I wouldn't be terribly surprised if that's actually how it happens as well. One young man in his teens explained that the new earth is already there, it's just in another frequency, and that we will actually move into that frequency and actually then be part of that new earth. So maybe that's the way it will happen.
Like the splitting of the timelines?
Yeah, something like that. And that there's a lovely drawing that I was sent only a couple of weeks ago, and it was a woman saying she was shown her daughter with this tall ET being, and there was this other reality, this new kind of Earth, and this was before her daughter was born. She was shown this image of her daughter being part of this new Earth as well. So that's just one image of many that have been talking about a kind of split or another dimensional Earth in another dimension, another frequency. That may be how it happens, and that makes a lot of sense to me, that it will be like that, more likely like that. So who knows? That's the adventure.
There is a lot of Randy Green, and you probably haven't heard of her, but what she is calling it, she's not talking about 3D, 4D, 5D. She's saying what is happening to the planet is it's shifting into density 2. That is what she's calling it.
Oh, right.
And she says, and it's pretty simple, not everybody will be capable of living there.
Okay.
They will not make the shift. So and I guess we have that in other religions as well. Let's say the entire idea of going to heaven.
Yeah.
And shifting out here from Earth and with a spiritual body and so forth. I think we have remnants of that in our religion, don't you?
Absolutely. And maybe that's what the ascension, is all about, is that we reach a certain level of awareness, spiritual frequency, where we literally don't have this physical container, this dense physical container, and that will be in a different form. And that fits very much for me as being a possibility. I think when I've tried to sort of get a sense of it, it's almost like it's beyond perhaps us fully understanding until we experience it. But I have been told that these next few years are very crucial to this shift in humanity and our consciousness, our spirituality. So certainly we're in it now. And I find that quite fascinating. As I said to you, I think it feels like we're in this really bad B-grade movie at the moment, doesn't it?
Yeah, and they are working their asses off to scare everybody shitless.
So at least I'll say this to you, Judith. I sort of did a deal with my sort of, as I call it, the team, and I said, look, as long as you keep it interesting down here, I'll hang around, but as soon as it gets boring, you can take me off. And it's interesting at the moment, so I'm going to hang around.
Okay, I have one question by a subscriber. I have to read it so that I don't mess it up. And she asks, because we just talked about this crazy situation that we are having here, are the elites hunting down certain bloodlines? That she has the feeling that the demonization of white people, it might have something to do with hunting down Rh negative blood types. And do you think there's something to it? Because she can't find anything.
Certainly it's relevant in the sense that particularly Rh negative, many of those seem to have conscious encounters and what have you. It's very much a pattern to a lot of people that have experiences. And it may very well be that what we call the elite, the Illuminati, all the different names that they're giving, is that they are trying to in some way compromise those that are not part of the program, that will not be part of their setup and what have you. More than anything else, though, I think it's about getting us to turn against each other so that we're not a coherent whole that they have to deal with. If they can split us up and cause us to fight each other, then I think that's how they can end up controlling us as well. But I do know many experiences have been targeted with certain frequencies so that they don't talk about this, or they shut down, or are in fear. And I think there's a lot of different levels to the agendas to shutting anyone down who might change the mandate or might for good in any way. Anyone who's got any influence or whatever, they're targeting. And that's lots of different ways they can do that, including the frequencies and the mind control, the propaganda and the fear.
Mm. When we look at this divide and conquer game that is going on here, and it seems to be increasing by the minute, what alien faction would benefit the most from that? Do you have any idea?
Well, I say, the ones that always come up, and I don't know. I have to say, I don't know for certain. I only know a little bit from what I hear as a researcher, that the ones primarily behind this are the draconians and some of the reptilians. Some say the Anunnaki, of different kinds of Anunnaki or whatever. Some say some forms of grey are negatives. There's even those that think the mantis are part of this, although mostly it's been positive in terms of the mantid. So, but look, I can't qualify any of that. I think some of it may be so, but there's not the problem as a researcher that it doesn't know what the government knows, and that's the problem. I don't know what they actually know. So I can only go on various researchers, various people with their experiences of different races. And even having said that, though, I've known some hybrids that one of them, particularly in England, a lovely lady, and she knows she's a hybrid reptilian human, and she actually prefers her reptilian side. She's a healer, and she tries to help, and she's trying to support and whatever, and she's actually a really lovely lady. The bottom line is, so there may be some of those species that have an agenda and are working with the humans that are ready or wanting to control the planet. And perhaps some of them are certain factions. But I've got no way of really qualifying that other than what I've learned as a researcher. So I can't say for certain because I don't know for certain.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We will not get a handbook for that. I'm pretty sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But sometimes, you have a feeling, a hunch, or what makes sense to you because of the experience that you gathered in the field. So I was just thinking I will ask. Do you know Pierre Sabak?
Sorry?
Pierre Sabak?
No.
Yes.
Oh, yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Yeah, yes. Holographic Culture. He has written that book.
Yes, I'm with you now.
Yeah. And when I asked him very directly at one point, and I said, is it fair to say that certain alien factions are running this place here as their personal enterprise? And he said yes.
Yeah. Well, certainly someone that I have great respect for, who works multidimensionally, has basically said there are certain factions on certain planets that have had an agenda for planet Earth. And, part of the reason we're having all these new children that appear to have dysfunctions has been deliberate as well, because it's all part of this control that they want to have on the planet. And that may very well be the case. The frustrating thing with all of this, Judith, is, and I sort of say, I want the truth. Whatever it is, just give me the truth. I'll handle it. The hard thing is that we're dealing with so many unknowns that we're trying to find our way. I feel like I'm a kind of cosmic Agatha Christie. Who did it, why, and what's the mystery? You know what I mean? Because it feels like that. You're constantly trying to connect dots, and they just keep going, and you can't seem to get to the end because it just keeps going. So at the moment, I wouldn't dismiss any hypothesis. to be honest. I would be open to any, because at the end of the day, I just don't know.
Yeah, exactly. So you are hopeful, yeah, optimistic, silently optimistic.
I am, because it's like somebody saying, oh, when I did grief and bereavement, and some people would believe there's nothing after death. And there'd be others that believe in, you know, another realm and another wonderful thing. And I remember, and they'd say to me, Mary, so what do you believe? And I'd say, well, I can't prove it, but I believe that we live and we continue and we have other experiences, etc., etc. And I said, but I can't prove it to you. So I said, to me, living this life, is it better for you to live it thinking there's something after this that you can look forward to, or do you live your life happier if you think there's nothing else? And I've decided that I think living with the idea that there is something else, whether I can prove it or not, is far better for me personally than thinking, oh, at the end of this, there's nothing else, and you know, I'm gone forever and whatever. So it really is making the choice, isn't it, at what you choose to believe that will help you live through your life. And to be quite honest, this life isn't generally a bowl of cherries, is it? You know, so you're hoping, you know, there might be something a little bit better at the end of the rainbow. And so I put that out there and said, this is what I want, you know. Whether or not I get it remains to be seen, but at least I have a feeling that there is, and that, you know, this is worth doing the best I can down here in the meantime.
Yeah, exactly. So, Mary, I thank you so much for coming. It was very nice and funny and interesting conversation. And all your website and everything, and the books, everything will be linked below. I hope you will come back one day, and stay safe and strong, and keep up the good work.
Oh, Judith, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. And yes, thank you for doing it. Thank you for doing what you're doing, because all of it makes a difference. I'm certain of it, because people are seeking answers. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, guys, that was it. Night flight for today. And with the lovely Mary Rodwell. We see you next time. Stay safe from tyranny and take good care of yourself. Bye-bye.